All right, that looks like a magic number for me. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to one of the first, hopefully not the last, joint webinars we do with Vanta. I'm joined by Kim Elias today. We're going to do a nice casual format on this. Conversational, ask me any stuff. If you have questions already, start putting them in the chat, start putting them in the Q&A. We'll find them anywhere. Today's AMA is all about compliance for early stage startups. How exciting is that? Probably not exciting to a lot of people. In the Gust network, often we preach proactivity, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of stuff. And it's tough as a startup, specifically with something like compliance, because nobody is going to knock down your door telling you you're doing it wrong until it is almost a death sentence for your company. The same thing with some of the stuff we preach with like Gust Launch and with financial model forecasting. It's like in the earliest stages when you're a startup, there's no one there being like, oh, you're not SOC 2 compliance, therefore something bad's going to happen. It's usually when to sync that final deal, you need this compliance and you're, backtracking and trying to figure out, you got so far in these conversations, they assumed that you had some level of compliance that you didn't. And now you're in like red alert mode or something actually bad happens. And, all that good faith and goodwill you've built up in early revenue and that crazy work you did ends up just getting squandered because you got hacked or you didn't meet a particular criteria or all those kind of things. So it's hard to be on the lookout for that stuff. With a million different things doing as a founder, it's often, bottom of the barrel of it. But I believe Vanta has made their entire business on how can you approach security and compliance in a way that doesn't break the bank or, waste all your time in the upfront, and so that you can build with it along the way as your company grows. So any questions anybody has at any given time about compliance, staying compliance, we will take. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Kim to give a more thorough introduction of Vanta and herself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I feel like that was an excellent lead up, not only to Vanta, but to the topic itself. You made the joke, this is maybe not something that's going to excite people. I feel like everybody here is hopefully going to be excited
I'm
about this
excited
topic.
by it, but
Yeah, me too. But you're right. I think it's very daunting, and I think you outlined very much like the riskiness with setting up your own compliance at a startup. So yeah, we'll get into it, but I think that's a kind of a great way to approach it. So yeah, I'm a senior compliance specialist at Vanta. I've worked in the security and compliance world for the last 8-ish years, and actually my bread and butter is helping smaller companies grow their own compliance and privacy programs. So I've got to see that at a good few places now at this point. I'm working with Vanta, helping our own compliance and privacy, but our tool is a trust management tool. So our goal is to help make compliance and privacy not only actionable and easier for your company, but much more transparent. So that comes from in-house with continuous monitoring, understanding what actually are you doing and what are you not doing, and then what gaps that presents for you. So if your goal is to comply with SOC 2, what do you need to do to get there? And then creating all of that in one handy portal trust center so you can show that to an auditor as well. So saying, hey, I know we do these things. Instead of just promising an auditor that you do it, having to root around, find some proof, you have one tool that you can show to them and say, hey, these are all the things we're doing. Look how we did it this past year. So I think, very topical for what we're talking about today, but we consider that one of our main goals is helping companies comply with what they're looking to comply with.
awesome. All right, we got a couple questions in chat that I'll get to in just a second, but to kind of put us all on the same page, what in the life of a startup? So in the Gust ecosystem, we have everybody from just I have an idea and I'm working on a Gust profile because someday I want to turn it into a business, to people who are raising a Series B round from like
Yeah.
legitimate funding providers. So as a founder, if I find myself anywhere along the spectrum, what are the kind of inflection points you would say compliance inflection points startups should have top of mind just in general? So if they had to write it down on a piece of paper one day, be like, at some point during, every quarter or so, I should check in to see if I'm approaching any of these inflection points.
Yeah. I would say a good inflection point is what are your customers asking about? Depending where you are with your series and funding, you may not have actual customers, so that might answer that question. But if you do have customers, are they asking you for audit reports? Are they looking to see, hey, do you have a security program? Do you have assurances that you do these things? I think that's a pretty early one. The other thing is depending on your industry, especially for financial services, there are other bigger frameworks that are going to be tied to the work that you're doing. So if you're handling sensitive data, if you're handling financial data, checking in to make sure are there legal requirements with that. And again, also if there's a customer implication there, if that's something you're checking in. And then I'd say when you get a little bit more mature, again, a little farther down the process, but still kind of a check-in point, is what are your stakeholders asking about? Do you have a board? Are they looking for assurances that you are doing something from a security or compliance perspective? Are there people who are, consulting on your company who are asking those sort of questions? I think you can like broaden your scope there or get it much more specific. But ultimately, who is asking? Why are they asking? And what implications does that have for your business?
Excellent. So it's largely led by who you're approaching, whether it's customers,
Yeah.
partnerships, vendors, investors. Is there anything that you think of proactively, like every founder should do, or every founder should explore some kind of like base level compliance, or is it really going to be driven by the other people on the other side of the table?
Oh, see, I'm biased. I work in compliance. So my answer is everybody should do compliance.
Of course.
My pragmatic, I think, approach is that for a lot of startups, security and compliance doesn't get a lot of like sexy time. It's not the kind of thing that you want as your front row seat because you're gonna have other priorities and focuses. That being said, I think it's a lot easier to plan and be proactive for compliance and security than it is to retroactively change your processes and your procedures. So I would say to be proactive to your question, consider like your 1 year, 2 year, 3 year roadmap and say, hey, if we can't do a SOC 2 today, do we know? Are we reasonably confident it'll be something on the horizon? And I think that is a good place to start. So if you think one day you're going to do a SOC 2, look at the framework, look at the controls, and be like, even at a high level, what are we doing or what are we not doing? Hey, we have no idea what we're doing for software development, technical controls. That might be an area that even if you can't change it today to comply, you at least have an awareness of how that's shifting and altering. So you can maybe have a conversation with your head of engineering and have an easier kind of bridge or pathway to compliance for that specific control.
So even if you're not going and getting any of these kind of acronym based compliance things, it's at least
Yeah.
having some kind of internal conversation about, what does the roadmap look like for our company?
Yeah.
Great.
And there are best practices to be clear too, to your point. Like I think, it's fun to kind of think of what are one of the acronyms that'll be like a nice thing to put on your resume for your company. But 100% there are like security best practices that you can look at that will help you with compliance. It might not be a one-to-one, but there are some commonalities that are going to help you.
Gotcha. We got a question from Patrick Van Horn in the chat. This is interesting. So I believe I inspired this question a little bit by talking about security incidents, and he's asking, besides company death, how do you know if you're doing something wrong?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a tough question. I have
So a little
lots of thought on
context on
that.
him. He's got a product in development. He has
Okay.
surveys out there, and his market's large. So it sounds like it's got consumers on it. There could be a lot of people are going to be necessary to make it successful,
Okay. All
customer
right,
base.
that's helpful. I'd say philosophically, to answer that question, I think there's a little bit of a gut approach. Does this feel wrong? Does this feel like something you would not want to advertise to a customer that you're doing? Does this feel like something that you wouldn't be proud if it got out in the news that your company is doing? I don't think that should be the be all end all, but I think there's a very valid approach there that is think about it from an outside perspective. I think if you had a little bit of time to get your feet dirty, that you had a little time to get gritty, I think looking at a framework and assessing how you would fall in that is a helpful baseline. So if you are doing something that directly is not in compliance with SOC 2, with ISO 27001, with NIST, you have some assurances that it's probably not going to be like super easy for other frameworks. So no, you shouldn't try and comply with everything from the get-go. And I don't think you should just like pick one in the dark, but there are going to be enough commonalities that you should try and use a framework to guide you. If you don't have a time to do that, gut approach, consulting with other people, I think there's a lot of validity there too.
And can we talk a little bit about, because I can see this a little bit in Patrick's questions. He had even more context. It's kind of like he's thinking of his company like an Airbnb, where people would think of it as impossible until somebody took a bet on it, right? Nobody's going to let somebody else sleep in their
Okay.
house. Like there will be murders. This is never going to market. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between compliance and legality?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times when we talk about compliance in the security space, SOC 2 and ISO get mentioned. So I want to use those as sort of like a baseline. No one in any space that I'm aware of says you have to do that or you're breaking the law. A lot of times you see them in contract requirements. Customers are looking for it. It's a best practice. It's becoming much more the norm to have those frameworks. There are, however, laws that say, hey, you need to comply with this or you're breaking the law. Again, it depends on the space that you're working in. Some are kinder than others. Some popular ones that I think come up in the news a lot, privacy law. So when we talk about GDPR, when we talk about CCPA, they are very directly saying if you read the legislation, if you do not comply and do these things, a regulator can come after you, a person can sue you, and you will have to pay a lot of fines and money. So anytime you're looking at something that you're worried if you have to legally comply with it, one, talk to someone who's knowledgeable about that requirement or about the industry you're in. But two, like you can actually practically see, are these just baseline? Is this just a framework that outlines requirements? Or is there somewhere some scary language about fines or breaking the law? Does it come from a a legislating body? Or does it come from, a third party? That's where you can start to understand that line too.
Yeah, and I think in my personal experience, Gust is
Yeah.
GDPR compliant. Once the European Union laid out those things, we have a global platform. We have angel groups all over the world. While we specialize in US based companies, we knew as a company, like we have the top 20 angel groups, from Indonesia to Colorado. So it's like we could either one, bifurcate our entire offering, put servers in Europe and separate them, but we'd been working on a very different internet. So even though we were a US based company who made all of our money from mostly US based customers, as soon as GDPR came down the pipeline, we looked at, well, what happens if you get in trouble for this thing? And it's like fines, 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 fines. It's like, okay, you know what? Let's just be GDPR across the board. If somebody in Delaware wants to email me and say, I have the right to be forgotten, I say, you sure you do. Even though you're not a European citizen, we're just going to do it across the board because we don't want to get sued.
And I think that's a good point too, that like brand recognition is very valid as part of that too. Like even if it's just a fine to you, which I have thoughts on that, but if you don't care about paying the money, do you really want to be associated with like a bad action that would be illegal from the EU's perspective? I think a broad approach for privacy is helpful to that way, Brian. So that's a great point.
And I would say I worked through our head engineer at the time when we implemented some of the changes we had to do for GDPR and the policies and whatnot. And like you said, the frameworks or the I can't believe we're gonna go pro regulation here, but like it made a ton of sense. Like walking through, it's like, yeah, it is reasonable that I should email a company and they have a 60-day window to delete my data. Like one, as a company, like that's reasonable because sometimes old systems and whatnot, it actually takes a while. You have to like be sure it
Yeah.
goes in. And other times it's, usually they don't make these frameworks so that they're absolutely ridiculous. Unless, you're talking bigger ticket things like SOC 2, where you're being forced to go into it because, you want to land that customer or it's, just
Yeah.
a checkbox on a vendor form. Uh, Jeffrey, you've got your hand up. I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to ask your question. Oh, wow, I didn't realize I'd pull you up there, but you are muted now. But if you can unmute, you should be able to ask.
Hi everyone. I'm running an e-mobility startup in Uganda. We import parts from China, and I'm really trying to think through doing things that don't scale. So when we import parts officially through the official channels, 50% of our bill of materials goes to taxes and compliance, certification, and all of that. And our customers are so price sensitive that we either have to lose money to get into the market, or we have to find ways to make the product cheaper through unofficial ways of importing, right? And at the early stages, that's less risky, but of course, as the business grows, it gets more risky and it's not scalable. But what do you think about, I would say being uncompliant at the start, because being compliant costs you the business or costs you actually being able to even build a viable market in a place like this. And I'm speaking from an African context where things are not there's not a lot of capital flying around that can typically help you lose money on the first units and make it up in volume.
Sure.
Yeah.
I got some thoughts on this, but Kim, you are our guest of honor if you want to kick it off from the compliance standpoint.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question and thank you for the transparency, Jeffrey, as you asked it as well. I am not an expert in manufacturing compliance, so I want to give that as sort of a caveat. There are people who know a lot about that space. I'm really just scraping the surface. I would be very wary to knowingly be incompliant with or uncompliant with something that might be potentially breaking the law. OFAC stuff is pretty strict generally, so importing and exporting. That being said, I'm going to speak a little bit more broadly and generally because I think your use case is pretty specific and you want to make sure that your stakeholders are on board with whatever decision your business is making. It is very rarely 100% compliance with whatever you are talking about. I don't think there's any company that waits until they are 100% compliant before they pursue something. That's just not the reality we live in. I think, however, there's a very reasonable approach, which is when you have stakeholders involved in making decisions, you make a risk-based approach. So you say, hey, this is a risk. We can or cannot act on it, but we want to identify that as a business. We don't want to do it with our eyes closed. We don't want to do it and never talk about it. But approaching things with the reality that if you waited until you were 100%, your business might not comply with it. Again, that might not be helpful for the context of what you're talking about, because again, I would be wary of that sort of landscape. But I think that is the reality of compliance. It's very rarely 100% checks the box. You did everything. It's always going to constantly evolve.
Yeah, I think I can add on to that with a bit of an example from areas that we do have familiarity with, and that is state-by-state filings in the US. So if you start a company in Delaware, which is usually what most US startups do if they're going after growth, and you happen to live in New York, New York has a bunch of laws that says, oh, if you're doing business out of the state of New York, you need to also register in New York. And maybe you have to pay some additional fees or, you have to pay, annual report requirements. And the question always comes like, okay, well, what if it's me and three friends and I'm in New York and one's in Mississippi and one's in Austin? It's like, well, each of those states also has the same kind of laws. And if you go to the website, the laws are impenetrable. They never tell you what's safe. They just tell you some things that aren't doing business because what they want to do, and this is most state regulators, this is a lot of countries, there's a lot of federal laws, is they want the ability to bring suit later if you start to blip on the radar. So what New York wants to do is if you end up building, a $0 to $2 million business over the course of the next 3 years and you never registered in the state, once they start getting the blips through other signals, they want to be able to come back to you and be like, hey, did you ever register for this? Like now you owe us back fees and fines and things like that. So we often advise, our startups who are considering that, especially in this day and age of like distributed teams, people could be in 4 different states. And it's like, you're going to spend $5,000 in foreign qualification fees and filing and whatnot just to get a business off the ground. Do you really need to do that? Exactly what Kim says. Find your risk pendulum. It's like, all right, if we have no customers, nobody knows who we are, we're trying to build a product and we're talking to people, and we know that everybody we talk to as an early customer is probably not going to sue us and is not going to go and call up the state and be like, hey, I don't know, I think they're doing sales in that state. Like, that's probably not going to happen. Might not happen for a year or two. But eventually, that you read each state's websites and you look at what happens if we do get called on it. And is that a risk that's acceptable for us to take? So a great example we often use is the Lone Star State, Texas. Their penalties for not filing in time is you just had to pay as if you did. So really, if I'm a Texas-based founder and I'm like, you know what, of all the 100 things I have to do, to get this thing off the ground, to get validation that people actually buy it, filing in Texas is probably not important this year. If I have the money and I don't care, whatever, it's a no-brainer. But if I really want to save money and I want to focus, and they catch up to me in 2 years, I know the kind of ramifications and I'm comfortable taking that risk. So in your situation, I would take a look at what are the compliance laws for importing. And if the result is you go to jail, if somebody finds out, and I don't know how Uganda-based business structures go, but we have limited liability companies in the States, so there is some protections there. It might kill your company, but at least it won't steal your house or take you to jail or anything like that. You can usually dial in the risks that are acceptable. And like Kim says, don't just set it and forget it and then be like, well, I guess we chose to take that risk, revisit it, after customer 10 or after customer 20. And the last thing from less of a compliance, but more of just a pure startup thought is if it takes selling products at a loss in order to get initial signal, definitely model out that if your customers are price sensitive now, does that ever change? I think you did mention economies of scale, so maybe there's just a minimum part order size where all of a sudden you go from an unprofitable to a profitable product line, but being sure that you don't want to have a good success and then realize oh, nobody could afford this at the scale that would necessitate this actually being a sustainable business. So you want to be sure it lines up with your business model as well.
I would just add on to Ryan's statement. I'm not a lawyer. As far as I know, Ryan isn't a lawyer.
Nope.
Consult a lawyer for all the things that we just talked about. These seem like good use cases to consult your legal counsel.
Yes, I'm not a lawyer. We are an accountant. We cannot provide legal advice. We can only provide expertise, experience, and best practices. Does that help, Jeffrey?
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. This just gives me that flashback of, if Uber had to get licenses in each of the cities it launched in, it never would have grown, right? But I think you kind of have to walk that line between and take the risk between, being very compliant, which usually takes a lot of resources and a lot of time and really slows you down versus being, reasonably compliant, which really gives you some flexibility and yeah, probably helps you survive longer until you have some sort of semblance of, this is either going to work or it's not going to work. And then you can be fully compliant. But I think I like your idea about always revisiting at different points of scale, because the risk at 10 units and the risk at 100 units is different.
Very much so.
And maybe when you get to 100 units, you need to actually be 100% compliant, because then, you raise a lot of flags that could lead to even more problems. But thanks a lot, guys.
Sure. I actually want to, you bring up the way you phrase that makes a lot of sense. Is like, you will hear in startup space, move fast and break things is like how new businesses get created. That saying has undergone some fire in the last couple of years because certain things broke that most people didn't want to break from, flagrant actions of entrepreneurs and or successful companies. Whether or not those are actually startups is a big question in these day and age. But it is, you need in the world of startups in general, and this is a interesting, whether it's a local statement or a global statement, but like innovation is at the boundaries, right? It's usually new products, it's new markets, it's markets where there's not regulation yet, so you don't even know what's legal or not legal. I mean, if you look at the crypto space, like what's a DAO? Can it have a business entity? Who gets in trouble if it breaks the law, et cetera? Like there aren't clear answers and there's not enough precedent. US law is based strongly on precedent. So as cases build up and time goes by, there's more clarity in terms of what is in and out. But all startup founders generally have to, deal with that pendulum, I like to call it, or the spectrum, and find what's comfortable to them. I think the biggest thing for us as squishy meat creatures and individuals is just being sure when that pendulum doesn't swing to your personal life or the people that your loved ones. So one of the interesting things about US and innovation is, and it's controversial to some people from various persuasions, but US based companies have limited liability. So a Delaware C Corp can go out and push against regulation or play in an unregulated space. And its founders can be confident that, if they take a little too much risk, the company could fail, right? They could get sued into oblivion when they don't have a lot of resources. They could get, just forcibly dissolved. You've seen things going on in the courts with even public companies now, but at least they're not going to lose their house. Their family's not going to be affected. They understand that. I remember we were over in Ireland for one of the EBON events, and they asked about, there was a big upswing in Irish entrepreneurial activity decades before. It's like, what was the thing? It's like, there was a while that company debts could flow into your family. So it's like just the structure of the company made it so that people didn't want to start companies because it was generally considered socially irresponsible or family irresponsible, because you don't want to saddle your parents with debt if your business enterprise doesn't work out or you get sued. The interesting thing about US is we are a very lawsuit heavy nation, and that determines a lot of things. And I think there's a bit of an elegance outside of the US and in general is the more value that you're creating, and I'm going to start to sound very Silicon Valley though, the more you will have the ability to get compliant. So if you think about something like GDPR, if you have a couple surveys out there, if people are trialing a free version of your product, if they're paying a small amount for it and it's like meeting their needs and they know you're a startup, and you have their email address, a profile or whatnot. If they file a GDPR notion to you and you're like, we don't even have like a GDPR policy, like I don't know how to delete this data, you don't get back to them for a week. Unless you have some significant amount of value in what that person is going to go after you, the reasons for them to go and sue you are kind of low, or file a complaint or follow it up, because it's like, oh, what value do you have there? But as your company grows, and like you said, you go from 10 to 100 customers, as you're, putting bigger order-ins, you'll start to see these natural inflection points of like, oh, wait, we're storing a ton of information about these people, and that is valuable to them. Therefore, we should be capturing some of that value. And I think this is sometimes the slippery slope of startup examples like Uber. A company like that needed a ton of capital in order to do what they did because they were bumping up against regulations at every step of the way as soon as they started getting it. But their approach was to get big enough where they could actually have a lobbying position to make room for themselves in that. So it is interesting to think about the value that you're capturing and providing to people and using that as a bead to be like, well, do I have enough money to spend on compliance? And am I creating a big enough signal or blip on a radar that if I do fall out of compliance, somebody's going to care about it enough to go after me?
I'll add like the specific detail. When you're looking at a risk register, if you're creating like a risk-based approach formally or informally in your business, there's typically two different data points that are really especially important for risk: likelihood and impact. You can't do one on its own. You need to combine them. And typically it's a multiplication, and that's sort of how you do your ranking. But I would like very much encourage, especially if, you know, under the context that Ryan's giving, if you're going to consider a risk-based approach, think how likely is this actually to happen? Like practically, how likely is it? But also, what would the impact be to you? If it means losing your house, that's a lot different, but it's also a lot different if you're saying your entire business could be at risk versus a fine versus what have you. So don't ever let one of those sit alone. They always have to sit together.
Yeah, it's actually the good insurance matrix, likelihood and mitigation.
There you go.
Jefferson's got a good question here. Is there any compliance for a hospitality business similar to Airbnb, like a base compliance for or a similar business?
Not my area of expertise. There may be, but again, sorry, I would consult with someone who's more knowledgeable in that space. I would say at baseline, if you're processing credit card information, PCI DSS is going to affect you. And if you're processing personal information, which I would imagine would be hard not to do in hospitality, some of the privacy stuff we've already talked about is going to impact you. So GDPR, depending on what state you're in, depending on how many people from other states you're doing business with, that could be applicable there. But sorry, I don't know anything specific for hospitality. I imagine there's some stuff with, you know, human health and that kind of thing, but
Yep.
not my area of expertise.
I would actually say when it, because there's a couple questions about Airbnb and like businesses and in this whole, sharing economy kind of stuff. Um, there's a whole level, a similar level to things that is insurance that is different than compliance necessarily. It's not the badge that you meet the seal,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're covered should something bad happen. I think Airbnb, the example is like people are going to get murdered in these houses. How on earth is this company going to survive that? Uber even had the same issues, right? Who's going to get in? I mean, I remember living in New York before Uber and black cars would pull up and everybody had an opinion on a black car. Oh, do you know it's illegal? Oh, can you trust those people? They're not taxi medallion, all those things, like operating in completely gray area, and that was illegal. If cops saw them, they'd actually pull them over. So once you're done with, oh, hey, I might not need a compliance seal. Be sure you also look at it from an insurance standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, do you have the insurances set up so that if one of those, how likely is it and how bad is it, the company can survive it. All right, we got Maximus in here, a Eurvo brand, a company building scooper leash hardware for dog walking, 250 billion GDP. I don't know what the question is there, Maximus. If you could clarify on that, unless you know Ervo, I do not.
No.
Da, 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 da. Hang on, Patrick. I'm reading your question real quick. Oh, you're asking about pitching, the capability of pitching when having voice and or communication difficulties from a stroke. This is something I can answer. It's kind of unrelated to compliance, but just the quick startup answer is investors will want to see the CEO of the company and they will want to communicate with the CEO of the company in the pitch. That is, you don't want somebody else telling your story for you, although bringing your team in to augment your story and in some cases to answer questions is definitely a supportive thing. You're going to run into different takes from investors and organizations if somebody who is not the CEO is leading the entire pitch and kind of running the whole deal, especially in an early stage company. They're going to want to meet with the CEO and have a means to communicate. But if you can find a way to do that where it is you are not like, I guess, surrogated, but without necessarily being out of the room or appearing as if like you are behind the curtains, that's the best way to approach that. And individual investors will vary, based on their preferences. All right, Kim, we got one for you. What if I turn auto insurance into fintech platform and then make a policy payment for the car as a bank brokerage for the owner and the car? Give me a second to think about that.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess, I think, at the underlying question, but
Yep.
again, Maximus, feel free to jump in if not. I think because we were talking about PCI, does this still have implications for processing payments? I think is the question. I would say, oh, he says turn my mic
Yeah,
on, so
I guess.
yeah.
Maximus, you should
George
be able to see.
Maximus.
There we go. We can hear
Okay,
you.
so I had so many things on my mind to talk about, but I figured this is a webinar, so I'll keep it short. So about the auto insurance is something I've been thinking about very strongly. I do feel auto insurance could be a fintech product in which the V number is a policy number for the car. If the person buys a luxury Mercedes, or any luxury cars for like $100,000, and they finance it, they will need a full coverage auto insurance, which is also very expensive. But what if they never crash the car for 10 years? Shouldn't they get about 55% of their money back? Now, this is leading to a question that's similar to the Uber scenario. It's a very controversial product where there's going to be a lot of red tapes. But in this day and age, with our technology platform, do you think we can get through this with any policy out there? Are you getting me, Kim? Is there a way you can shed some light on this?
I don't know that I can shed light on it, but I'll at least attempt to have a response back, and feel free to jump in, or Ryan, jump in. I think there are limitations of how much you can isolate a compliance issue by making it into a technology problem. Technology has the same implications as a lot of like the older industries do. We just have more, I think, of a presence or a focus on it, honestly, when it comes to both the world that a lot of us work in, but also like from a news perspective. You do not necessarily avoid a landscape of insurance or broader implications because you've transferred the onus onto a product versus a service. So I'm not fully sure I understand your question. I'm not sure fully I would have an answer, but I think my response is I think there are implications regardless. I think this is more of a product or service issue than it is actually a compliance issue at the end of the day. Ryan or Maximus, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say insurance companies are already fintech companies. As soon as they got websites, as soon as they started processing credit card payments, they're fintech companies. But I do know our other partner, Vouch, who does startup insurance, they have asterisks to the hilt on what I can even say when we do a webinar. Because they're like, you're not a licensed insurance provider. You're not this, you're not that. So you're going to have to, in order to provide insurance, which is required by law for all vehicles, you will have to be a licensed insurance provider. And I believe that comes with a lot of limitations around how you can make money, when you can make money, how it's structured. So there could be something there in terms of, can you be a cheaper insurance provider by checking all the boxes and providing the consumer what they want, which is basically a reward on the premiums that they played? I don't know, maybe you
Correct,
want to work with
correct.
lawyers there to figure out if can you even do that as an insurance provider, because it could be there could be protections around, like, how does that incentivize people to drive or to not drive or to car share, to do this and that, which might violate just what even the licensing requires. So I don't think just saying it's a fintech platform is going to save you at all from that. You're still going to be a licensed insurance provider and you're going to have to obey those laws.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like right. Thank you.
And it's tough, sure thing. And we have some upcoming programming with Vouch, which I would love to hear their their heavily asterisk answer to it, but it might shed some more light. There should be something coming out in a month or so with that.
Perfect. I'll be around to shed some more light on it. Because I was reading
Excellent.
about Travis on Uber. I saw where he went, and I feel very strongly that auto insurance for Americans should go back to reward the American family if they don't crash their car. Up to 50% or 55%, either to take a new policy with the money or to pay for college education in the future. But the money shouldn't just be lost
We
just in case
I think
a
we all
car
like it. I
crashes.
do know in America we get commercials all the time about driver incentives, paybacks, premiums getting lowered if you have good driving history, if you meet certain milestones from your traditional providers like Geico and State Farm, whatever. So maybe look at them as examples and how they're navigating that. But be on the lookout for more stuff, and I will send some invites shortly about more insurance-oriented events. And thank you for the good question.
Thank you.
All right. Did I miss any during all that? Patrick, and let me know if we gave you a good answer to that other question. Um, oh, here we go. Oh, okay. I can take this question, I think. And Kim, it sounds like you have relevant experience.
Yeah.
Um, I believe the question you're asking, Patrick, is attorneys. That attorneys need to be around to start a business entity, and to set up agreements and things like that. But is it needed right away? So this is one area that Gust is actually, this is our market. So traditionally, yes. For the most part, if you're starting a very simple business like an LLC, you can do so at your Department of State's website. You pay a couple $100, you file a form, you get a single owner LLC, and all the taxation has happened on your personal taxes. It's just a pass-through entity, so you can do business. Weirdly enough, in America, if you just start doing business, you automatically become a sole proprietorship, even though you never filed a form, even though you never talked to a lawyer, even though you registered something in the state. It just so happens if you generate money, it goes into your bank account, and therefore you have to claim it as income when you file your taxes. But you're a sole proprietorship. The danger of that is if you go around sole proprietoring and somebody doesn't like what you do and they sue you and you have no business entity, they're just suing you as an individual. So most people who set up businesses that have any kind of risk or want to make, basically make their living, they set up an entity like an LLC, which is a limited liability company. And that allows the company. So if you have a plumbing company, you can set that up. And if, somebody's basement gets flooded and they sue your LLC, at least they won't go after your house. They can maybe take some of your business assets and things like that. Could be some issues, but you protect yourself a little bit. If you're getting into really bigger companies, it's usually C corporations, which is just the tax code for C. It's not a double alliteration. But a C corporation is a corporation that has a bit more of a formal structure. It has shareholders, it has a board of directors, and it has officers. Officers are like president, secretary, and it also has liability protection, but it is taxed as a completely separate entity. Up until maybe a decade ago, getting a C Corp set up is not as easy as just going to the Department of State website, filing a thing, and being like, hey, I'm an LLC, and I make all the decisions and everything goes to me. You have to formally set up the board. You have to appoint the officers in the appropriate way as according to state law. You have to grant ownership in the company through stock grants, and those owners need to, have, rights and obligations for the entity. And most lawyers would basically say, yeah, I'll set you up as a C Corp for like $3,000 to $5,000. They'd put a bunch of templates that their firm has and whatnot. They'd maybe even give you a leather book to be like, hello, look at you. Now you can do board minutes and have a good time. You're a corporation. And that was totally worth paying because those documents are confusing. They point to various states of Delaware law. They have to work together. It's very unlikely if you downloaded, a board appointment from one site and an officer agreement from another that they'd actually work together. And nothing breaks when you're doing business. It's just once good things happen and people have to look at the history of the company, then things start to break where it's like, oh, well, you never actually appointed officers or you don't actually have shareholders. It's a shell corporation. So now you don't have full liability protection, or those weren't the directors at the time that you said that you approved that. And as long as nobody's fighting, the only bad thing that happens is you have to pay a lawyer a lot of money to fix it up when somebody else cares about it. The biggest thing is when somebody wants to invest in it. They want a clean corporate history. They want to be sure the corporation owns everything, that the owners of the corporation are fairly compensated, et cetera. And they'll want you to go back through your whole corporate history to make sure that's straight. And you'll pay a lawyer hundreds of dollars an hour, if not more, to go and just make a bunch of agreements to get everybody to agree if everything is agrees. If people don't agree, you get into heck. And then you start getting it, things start to fall apart. That is a lot cheaper these days because of Gust launch. Our premium software solution is basically, we have worked with top startup lawyers and we have streamlined all that through software. So now setting up a Delaware C corporation, appointing the officers, the directors, the shareholders, doing all the powers, using common contracts, like anything as simple as an NDA to like a contractor agreement, an advisor agreement, a safer convertible note to take in money, stock grants for your employees or your co-founders, even stock option plans for later employees. All that stuff is clean and automated with a kind of click next to continue thing. And we charge way less for it because we built it into software. So if you have nothing, you don't need a lawyer to actually get an entity up and running. But if you're going to do something more significant, more serious than just kind of a sole proprietorship or a small protection entity, I would highly suggest either working with a lawyer or using a software platform of some quality. I would advise against going after general purpose legal template solutions. They are often marketplaces to upsell lawyer firms, and you can kind of like, you can almost construct any agreement on there. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're either going to overpay for a bunch of overcomplicated documentation or you're going to set the wrong thing up. But if you're a high growth startup, check us out. We're at gust.com/launch. We can help you out. And we do have a whole network of lawyers after the fact that we can introduce you to when it makes sense for your business. I hope that helps, Patrick. And sorry, Kim, stealing your thunder by being able to talk my book at our joint
No, all
event.
good.
But let's get some more compliance stuff. Can you lay out just we've said a lot of acronyms, but so people can actually
Yeah.
couch them in their minds. The most common ones: SOC, SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA. What else we got? And what are they? What do they
Ooh,
mean? Who do they fit for?
yeah. Those are like great questions. Yeah, sorry, never want to presume that we should be talking in acronyms and everyone should know what those acronyms mean. We over acronym too much, I think, in this industry. That is almost impossible. Um, so so HIPAA is an easy one. Let's talk about that one straight away. It's not easy, to be clear, but it's a little more straightforward, and I think people have heard of it
One of the
before.
hardest ones to obey, but
Yeah.
easy to understand.
Yes. So to be clear, if you've heard of HIPAA, you usually associate it with healthcare. There is a compliance industry around it. You typically hear things like a HIPAA risk assessment or HITECH. They're both to focus on how you process electronic or in person personal health information. So they're not going to be as straightforward as you do these 10 things and you comply. It's a little bit more, are you protecting the health information and how are you doing that? And do you have the appropriate assurances in place? Healthcare, yes, is a very regulated industry. So you a lot of times have laws that are specific to that as well. But those are ways that you can show and honestly guide you to make sure you're doing like the security measures possible there. SOC is specific to security practices that your company does. There's broadening of scope. It's not just focused on security. It can focus on availability, on confidentiality, on integrity, on the privacy of your data. But you don't have to do all those things, but it's baseline of security. It's actually created by auditors back in the day who were accountants who said, hey, let's use our knowledge and our baseline of how to do a financial audit and see how we would focus that on security. It's become a lot more standard in the space. You'll hear SOC 1 sometimes and SOC 2. SOC 1 is actually a financial audit, so it's focused on the financial systems. A SOC 2 is focused on the security. There's SOC 2 type 1 and type 2. One is basically an audit that's at a point in time to assess your processes. A SOC 2 type 2 is like checking that those processes are actually following what you say they do. It's a lot of words, but those are some common ones I feel like that you hear about. Another one I mentioned that I now want to backtrack and explain a little bit more is ISO. So ISO is again a regulatory body that's defining frameworks and standards. They just released one that got some news that you may have heard of that's specific to AI. So 42001 is a framework that's specific to AI. 27001, which I mentioned, there's loads of them. Feel free to look them up, is again a security focused audit. So it's how are you approaching those processes and procedures? Are you fulfilling them? They're going to kind of go the gambit, but when you think about things like encryption, when you think about things like, again, like data handling, it's going to be processes and procedures around that. Happy to answer any specific questions about those, but that's my best way in like 4 minutes to do the simple summary at the very least.
No, that's great. And we probably should have started out with that, but we had some good questions to kick it off.
Yeah.
And I do believe it's been a while since I've looked into these, but I believe SOC 2, close to my domain as a previous engineer. SOC 1 is the one you can kind of do on yourself with help, but you don't get auditors involved in your space, while SOC 2 is the one that it's much heavier weight, right? What is the difference between the two? And would you ever have to do one and not the other?
Ooh, so it depends. You can technically do any audit on your own. I'm never going to say like you couldn't try. An auditor is the only person that you need an accredited body to give you an actual report and to say that you did that audit. So internal audits are very valid. I never want to say that you can't do it on your own, but you can't say that you've got a SOC 2. You can't say that you've got a SOC 1,
Right.
Unless you get an auditor involved. The use cases, typically when you see people starting to get into the security space and they want to kind of get an assessment, a SOC 2 type 1 is a good place to start. It's going to assess you for what you're doing and what you're not doing. And you want to have an idea of that before you start, but it's still a helpful baseline. SOC 2 type 2 is a little stricter because it's going to say basically, okay, you say you have an encryption policy. It says that you encrypt your data using AES 256. We're going to check that. We're going to check your data and see you're doing it. Yeah, exactly. Prove it. Not just say you do it, not just show that you have a document that says it, but prove it. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's just a good idea to do a type 1 just because you've had a big change in your business, you're changing auditors, you want to kind of have an assessment there. But I feel like most often it's because you're new and you want to kind of get an assessment before you go in with the big dogs.
Yeah. And I've seen myself personally SOC 2 1, SOC 2 level 1, type 1 audits. And there's some silly stuff in there where depending on your business, you're like, that's ridiculous. Why do I have to answer these questions?
Yeah.
But it is a pretty good framework. And like to a lot of people asking, reassessing this, it's a great idea to like go through, at some periodicity as your startup hits a milestone, if you successfully raise funds and you're ready to hire, hey, it's a great idea. Maybe take a step back and be like, let's run through our SOC compliance. Let's see if there's anything changed in our business. Oh, we're going to build this new product. We're going to connect these two products. Or we're going to go after a different customer segment, or we're going to more formalize this, or we're going to scale from 10 units to 100 units. Like, let's revisit our compliance situation to be sure that maybe nothing's changed, but maybe, you know, we want to pursue this.
100%. I'll also add too, and I feel like this throws people for a loop when I say this, but a SOC 2 is customizable. Not just, you know, one word, one phrasing, that's what you do. It's actually meant to really focus on the scope of business that you want it to, and you change the controls to fit your company. So again, you can't just like backtrack and be like, no, this is actually what I meant when you're doing an audit. But there's like a work that you do with an auditor. And if you have an internal compliance person, if you have a tool like Vanta, that's a little bit of figuring out when you take the baseline controls, how do you fit that into your company? I actually really love that. I think it's a very positive way to look at compliance. It's a little bit more practical than just always wagging your finger and saying to do things, but keep that in mind too, that yeah, it can be a tedious process to do it, but at the end of the day, you're trying to scope it so that it makes sense for your business, not doing it just because.
Yeah. And I remember, especially in early day startup things, is having, it's amazing how far certain kinds of answers will go once you have the question. It's like you mentioned PCI compliance earlier, where it's like most startups never hold credit card information themselves anymore because they use Stripe or they use Braintree or they use PayPal or something like that. So oftentimes it would be like, are you PCI compliant? It's like, am I? No. But like, do I need to be? Also no, because I don't hold the credit cards. I use a vendor, and you'll hear this all the time in startups. Like, what is your security policy? It's like, we use AWS. Like they encrypt things, right? It's like, I mean, sort of like you could open up a server to the wide old internet and, you know, rip all the things off that you sometimes do get. But it is good just to have the vernacular and brush up on that.
100%. And to your point from earlier, like limiting liability too. If you're using a third party, that can be great. Knowing that you do that and how that benefits you, whether or not you need to comply with something, really important parts of being a small business, trying to get your legs underneath you.
And even on the financial side of it, you can run, I mean, I know, I forget what it is, 37 Signals ran their whole analysis about their cloud bill, you know, to do compliance and things like that. And they're like, we actually don't, we could run our own servers based on how this is going now. It's like, oh, what do you do? It's like, well, you take on a bunch of compliance risks, possibly, right? If you're outside of that, and you can use compliance to be like, is it worth it? Am I getting the value out of Stripe? I'm paying Stripe 3% per transaction. You know, it's a small amount, but as those figures start to grow and you start looking at, you know, how much revenue is going to that, it's like, well, you know, intuitively, I would say like, well, having more of that money would be great. Like, yeah, but like, if it means being compliant, like how much does compliance cost? Which I think leads me to another fun question, and probably something on anybody's mind, Miss Vanta. Well, how much does compliance cost? Can I just go buy a SOC 2 from you guys and pay a one-time fee? Like, what is the actual expectation of paying for these kind of things?
My really, really annoying answer, it varies.
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me clarify where Vanta gets involved too, because I think that's relevant. So we help you comply. We're going to help you with the framework. We're going to show you what things you should do. That's a baseline cost. I think a pretty reasonable one, but it's baseline cost. You're going to still pay an auditor to assess you, right? Like I said, anyone can audit. You can use a tool just for fun because you like to it. If you want someone to come in and assess you, you're going to pay an auditor that. Auditor fees vary based on the size of the firm, based on where they are, based on how many people are going to be spent doing that audit, based on the scope of your audit, based on which audit